You sit down to eat lunch by yourself. You glance at your phone. You glance around the room. Something in your chest tightens just slightly, and you can't explain why. It feels like everyone is watching you chew. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself you're imagining it. But the real answer is far stranger than social anxiety. Your body is running a program that is hundreds of thousands of years old. It was never built for a desk, a food court, or a solo dinner in front of a screen. It was built for something else entirely. Food, for most of human history, was never a private act. It was a public event, a test, a signal, and your brain still treats it that way even now, even when there is nobody actually watching at all. Think about the last time you ate alone in public. Maybe you chose the seat in the corner. Maybe you angled your body toward the wall. Maybe you ate faster than you meant to, just to be done with it. None of that was random. It was instinct, dressed up as a personal quirk. What if the discomfort isn't about you at all? What if it's about a rule your species has followed for nearly its entire existence? One you never agreed to but inherited anyway? Start with the body itself. Your stomach doesn't just process food. It listens to context. Researcher John DeCastro spent decades studying something called social facilitation of eating, and what he found should sound impossible. People eat roughly 44% more food when they are eating with others compared to eating alone. Not because the food tastes different, not because portions change. Something about the presence of other humans flips a switch in how much your body believes it is allowed to consume. Why would your body care who else is in the room? Because for nearly all of human evolution, eating in a group wasn't just nice. It was survival information. If others were calmly eating beside you, that meant the food was safe, the area was safe, and there was no immediate threat worth fleeing from. A meal shared was a signal that the danger had passed, at least for now. Eating alone sent the opposite signal. Out on the open savanna, an early human eating in isolation was an early human with no one watching their back, no one to warn them, no one to help if a predator appeared. Solitary eating wasn't peaceful, it was exposed. There's another layer hiding underneath that exposure, and it has to do with food itself. Meat spoils. Fruit attracts competitors. A kill draws scavengers within hours. For most of human prehistory, finding food was unpredictable, and keeping it was even harder. The safest way to manage that unpredictability wasn't to hoard a meal in secret, it was to share it. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Hadza of Tanzania and the Juhwanzi of southern Africa, have documented this pattern again and again. A successful hunter rarely eats his kill alone even when he easily could. The meat is divided almost ritually among the group. Researchers studying these food-sharing customs describe it less as generosity and more as insurance. Today you have meat and I have none. Tomorrow the roles might reverse. Sharing the meal now means someone will share with you later. A solitary meal breaks that insurance policy. It tells the group you don't need them, and worse, that you can't be trusted to include them. This is where anthropologist Richard Wrangham's research becomes impossible to ignore. Wrangham proposed that the discovery of cooked food didn't just change human digestion, it changed human society. Cooking takes time. Time around a fire. Time spent waiting together, sharing the same heat, the same smell, the same anticipation. Wrangham argued that the communal meal, built around fire, became one of the central, organizing rituals of early human life. The hearth wasn't a kitchen. It was a meeting point for trust. Sit with that for a second. The act of eating together may be one of the oldest forms of human bonding we have, older than language as we use it today, older than agriculture, older than almost everything you consider modern social life to be built on. So when you eat alone now, in a cafeteria, in a car, at a desk, some ancient part of your nervous system registers it as strange. Not dangerous exactly, but off script. A break in a pattern that goes back longer than civilization itself. There's a deeper layer to this too, and it comes from evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar. Dunbar is best known for studying the size of human social groups, but he also studied something called commensality, the practice of eating in shared company. Dunbar found that group meals release oxytocin and trigger the same neurological bonding circuits as physical touch and laughter. Sharing food isn't a metaphor for closeness. It is closeness, biologically speaking, which means eating alone isn't just socially awkward, it's a kind of starvation, not of calories, of connection. Have you ever noticed how much faster food disappears in a group? Part of that, researchers believe, comes from something called impression management. When others are watching you eat, especially strangers, you instinctively slow down, take smaller bites, and become hyper-aware of how you look doing something as basic as chewing. This is why eating alone in public, in front of unfamiliar people, often feels worse than eating alone at home. At home, no one is grading the performance. In public, your ancient social radar assumes someone might be. This single unconscious assumption shapes more modern behavior than you'd expect. It's part of why solo diners often request seating facing a wall. It's part of why some people would rather skip a meal than eat by themselves in a crowded restaurant. It's part of the strange modern explosion of mukbang videos, where millions of people now eat virtually alongside a stranger on a screen just to recreate the ancient feeling of a shared table. Your ancestors didn't need a screen for that. They had a fire, a circle, and each other. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The same instinct that makes group meals feel safe can also make them dangerous in a world of abundance. Remember De Castro's 44% figure. That number evolved in a world of scarcity, where eating more in the presence of others made sense, because more food was rarely guaranteed, and a group meal was often the biggest meal you'd get for days. Your body still runs that exact calculation today, except now the table is never empty. The instinct that once protected you from starvation now quietly encourages overconsumption at every group dinner, every holiday table, every office party with a buffet. The safety signal hasn't changed. The food supply around it has changed completely. You are still listening to advice meant for a world that no longer exists. And here's the twist inside the twist. Loneliness while eating doesn't just feel bad. It registers, physiologically, almost identically to mild starvation stress. Studies on social isolation have found elevated cortisol and inflammatory markers in people who regularly eat alone, particularly older adults living by themselves. Your body isn't being dramatic when it tenses up during a solo meal. It is responding to a condition it was never designed to tolerate for long. For most of human history, an isolated eater wasn't just sad. They were a body the group had, in some way, already started to lose. Now compare that to your actual daily life. Meals eaten in cars between errands, lunches eaten at a desk between emails, dinners eaten standing at a kitchen counter, scrolling, barely tasting anything. None of this resembles what a human meal looked like for the overwhelming majority of our species' existence. Walk through any modern office around noon, and you'll see it play out in real time. Half the room eats together in the break room, laughing, relaxed, barely noticing the food at all. The other half eats alone at their desks, eyes fixed on a screen, shoulders slightly curled inward, as if trying to take up less space. Nobody trained either group to behave this way. Both are simply following a script written long before either of them existed. Even the architecture of modern eating reflects this old anxiety. Restaurants design solo dining counters facing the kitchen instead of the room, so a lone diner never has to feel surrounded by tables of strangers. Food delivery apps surged not just because people wanted convenience, but because eating delivered food at home, away from public eyes, removes the ancient pressure of being watched while alone. Even the modern habit of eating dinner in front of the television exists partly to fill the same void a missing companion would have filled around a fire 40,000 years ago. The television doesn't notice you. But some old part of your brain doesn't fully register the difference. So the tightness in your chest when you eat alone in public isn't irrational. It isn't weakness. It's an inherited signal, thousands of generations deep, quietly asking the same question your ancestors once asked around every fire they ever sat beside. Is it safe here? And is anyone with me? Modern life rarely answers that question the way evolution expects. We eat faster, alone, more often, and call it efficient. But your nervous system never received the memo. It still scans the room. It still tightens slightly during a solo meal. It still remembers, somewhere underneath conscious thought, that food was never supposed to be eaten in isolation. There's a quiet irony in all of this. The same species that built skyscrapers, satellites, and global food supply chains still flinches, just a little, at the idea of eating a sandwich by itself in a parking lot. Progress reshaped almost everything about how food reaches your plate. It did almost nothing to reshape what your nervous system expects once that food gets there. You can order a meal from across the world in minutes. You still can't talk yourself out of feeling exposed while eating it alone in public. Maybe that's worth carrying into your next meal. Not as anxiety, but as information. The discomfort isn't a flaw in you, it's a relic. A working artifact from 100,000 campfires you never sat at but somehow still remember. It explains why a meal shared with even one other person can feel disproportionately better than the same meal eaten alone, regardless of conversation, regardless of how good the food actually is. It explains why isolation during meals correlates, across multiple studies, with lower reported well-being, even among people who otherwise enjoy solitude. And it explains why, even now, in a world of infinite restaurants and infinite delivery options, the single most requested feature people say they want from a meal isn't a better dish. It's company. So tonight, when you sit down to eat, alone or otherwise, pay attention to that small, ancient flicker in your chest. It isn't really asking if anyone is watching you chew. It's asking if anyone would notice you were gone.